a major victory for Satan.
Concerns marriage. Marriage is central to the purpose of mortal life and what follows. We are children of a loving Heavenly Father who created us with the capacity to follow His commandments to multiply and replenish the earth. That power of creation is one of the most precious gifts we have in mortal life. But central to that gift is the law of chastity, the commandment that our powers of procreation be expressed only within marriage between a man and a woman. That commandment is central to the gospel of Jesus Christ. That reality explains why we have different values and refrain from certain behaviors that seem common among many around us. Our attitude toward the definition of marriage and toward marriage itself are examples of that. Leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ are uniquely concerned about recent changes in the nature and extent of marriage in the United States. This includes the increasing tendency of U.S. citizens, including some worthy young Latter-day Saint men and women, to postpone marriage. To demonstrate that tendency, let us look at two charts on marriage. While these figures are for the United States, they represent a worldwide problem. The first chart shows the significant reduction in the percent of citizens in the United States who have ever married. In the last 30 years, this percent drops 8 to 9 percentage points for both men and women. Marriage is clearly on the decline in the United States. This second chart shows a related increase in the age of marriage of young Latter-day Saints. This portrays the average age of Latter-day Saint men and women at the time of their first marriage. It shows an increase of about 5 years for both men and women. Consider what young adult Latter-day Saints miss when their marriages are intentionally delayed for a significant period. Opportunities lost and blessings postponed. This means delays in the important personal growth that occurs in the relationship between a man and a woman, husband and wife, growth in such qualities as sacrifice and humility. It means decreased opportunities to work together to build the kingdom of God. And most important, it means fewer children born to grow up with the blessings of the gospel. You know all of this, and you need to know that your leaders know that many of our singles are not marrying sooner for reasons beyond their control. I will say more of that later.
Travis Wanguzzo. So those of you who have followed me, and you have heard my warning about what the church is planning to do for their millennial kingdom, I just played you the clip. That's what Oaks is planning for his millennial presidential reign over the church. Women, no more education, no more career. You must be a breeder. That's the simply put answer. He's telling you to marry early because you're taking too long to get married. That's what the charts were all about. And of course, he threw in a little dig that the church doesn't respect the Respect for Marriage Act that they were responsible for getting passed in Congress, signed into law. Because the church put in their exemption clause in order to approve it. And everybody missed it in the news. Everybody thought, oh, the church now approves of LGBTQ. Isn't that great? Church is changing. We can change the church. No. See, in Nazi Germany, right before it began, they began a labeling process. I say that because he uses labeling later on. We'll get to that. And those labels included those who were designated as gay. So that when Hitler won the election with his Socialist Party, and then while in office changed it to fascism for the Nazi Party, yeah, they used those identifications to lock up people, to torture them, to murder them. And so if you think that the Utah legislature has had a change of heart towards LGBTQ by allowing you to change your driver's license identifications, why will you not learn from history? Why are you always doomed to repeat history? This is the church's plans for the millennium. To take away agency. And whose plan of happiness is it? The one who established the covenant path in the Salt Lake Temple headquarters with his symbol on the keystone of the doors of that building. You all know it. But that's it. That is his plan. And so, yes, he does recognize the economic struggles that we are already going through and have been going through as part of the reason why so many of us are unable to get and stay married. He did not include those into his equation. And as I've tried to warn you, because if you're not paying attention to the news, you really ought to. And if Fox News isn't doing it for you, don't go to AON or Newsmax or whatever it's called. They aren't going to tell you either, per se. MAGA was involved in the insurrection of America on January 6th. Senator Lee was one of those. He was ordered by the church to play his role in the Senate to do that. Church is behind all of the problems we face. That's another one coming up here, most likely, talking about fascism. And because the Department of Justice under Merrick Garland has failed to indict those in Congress and in the Supreme Court too, now that we're finding out, and have allowed them to continue to hold office in violation of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, they then are going on to the next phase, because that's what they do. If they can get away with stuff, they then take it to the next step. They overthrew Roe v. Wade, they're now going to the next step. And that's abortion clinics and abortion pills. And then there's the next phase after that. Contraception. And all this has to do with the church's concept of marriage. Because the church used to have, well, we've got an economic collapse coming. That's the thing, the debt. They're holding America hostage by refusing to raise the debt ceiling or figure out a way to budget better. And this will crash our economy. This will destroy America. We can't run if we don't have an economy to pay for things. This will cause many problems for you. And the only solution is Biden must declare martial law. And so I probably should have written down my tangent before going back to finish my tangent to cover the thing, or I can stop this video and then figure out what it was and then come back if it doesn't come to my mind as I ramble on. And I'm probably going to have to do that. And yet again, something more to add. By preparing children for marriage and breeding early, when the government collapses, there will be lots of deaths that will occur. And with a mass extermination of the human race will come the necessity, in order to preserve the human race, for women to be breeders. The church will then come out and use that as the justification for women to do their duty to replenish the earth. And so the younger the better. And they will then justify it. But remember, the church caused the problems that will lead to the extermination of the human race, so that they can then justify committing the atrocities and abominations. Lest we forget. Adoption agencies. Yeah, the church used to run an adoption agency through the LDS Family Services, now called Family Services, because Nelson said that LDS makes Jesus angry and is a major victory for Satan, which is why I use that clip. and what they were doing was taking babies away from Mormon girls who got raped or, puppy love because they weren't given proper sex ed, and thus babies ensue. And so then you have the church putting on a guilt trip on the woman, victimizing her for being pregnant out of wedlock, and also victimizing them if they were victims of rape. And BYU has been under intense scrutiny for their horrible atrocities toward women who were raped. Excommunicating them, kicking them out of school, just destroying their lives. But this is what the church is going to return to, because they claim that women can't be trusted with their agency, and so it must be taken away from them. And thus they take away babies, forcing the girls to have the baby. No abortions allowed. And that is completely unscientific. And it's just absurd thinking to give rights to a fetus over the woman who's already a citizen, who's supposed to have guaranteed inalienable rights. Especially after the Constitution had an amendment put in for women to have equal rights to vote. Not the Equal Rights Amendment, which the church was key in preventing from getting passed into law. And the adoption agency, therefore, was a human trafficking operation, forcing the girls not to have an abortion and then putting the baby up for adoption through their adoption agency to be given to good Mormon couples. But then LGBTQ marriages were allowed in the nation, and the church was under scrutiny for human trafficking, and so they gave it up. But when they get their kingdom back, so too will they restore this practice. Because not everybody will be worthy of the kingdom, but they do need slaves to support them in their lifestyle that they're accustomed to. And thus, those slaves who are wicked and have babies out of wedlock because they're not worthy to be married will then have their babies taken away and given to the members of the kingdom. The church has already revealed how they're going to run their kingdom. And when you hear Oaks talk like this, he's telling you how he will run the church if he doesn't have the government to hold him back. And he brought up the law of chastity, as if that somehow was going to convince all of us to breed like rabbits in the temple covenant. So I will need to bring it up on the screen here. And I made sure to transfer it into this file for the purpose of this series. In 2019, Nelson, with the help of Oaks, changed the temple text. And all of you got distracted with, oh, women no longer wear a veil, and Eve has a bigger speaking role, and we no longer obey our husband. We now obey God, who is the prophet who orders us to obey our husband. But then the law of chastity was also changed. And that became some of my #1 videos until this last conference with the name issue. So here it is. I'll read to you what previously was and then what it was changed to. Notice the pronoun usage. We are instructed to give unto you the law of chastity, which is that each of you shall have no sexual relations except with your husband or wife to whom you are legally and lawfully wedded. Okay? That was the change that was made in 1991. President Ezra Taft Benson. I got home from my mission. That was now the change. Before my mission, when I went in, it was intercourse, sexual intercourse. Big difference, huh? Because relations Oh, it may be intercourse, but it could be a whole lot more. See, the church, before my time, used to order Mormons how to conduct their sex lives in the bedroom. No contraception. I know what I'm talking about, guys. And no other techniques, we'll say, other than for the purpose of having babies. Do I need to get graphic with that? Do I need to turn this into a porn? And so, yeah, sex was only for having babies. And no contraception. You had to have babies. And now Oaks is returning to that. Here's the change. We are instructed to give unto you the law of chastity, which is that the women of God's kingdom and the men of God's kingdom shall have no sexual relations except with those to whom they are legally and lawfully wedded according to his law. And if you're confused as to what his law is, he also changed the law of the gospel, the higher law now. We are required to give unto you the law of the gospel, which is the higher law taught by Jesus Christ, as contained in the Holy Scriptures. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because the Book of Mormon condemns it 5 times. Joseph Smith had a whole chapter on it. What is Section 131 used to have Joseph Smith talking to a monogamous couple saying you can gain exaltation by being sealed in the temple. The highest degree of the celestial kingdom. The higher law. That was gutted to be included in Brigham Young's Doctrine and Covenants the year before he died. And lo and behold, some mysterious secret document reappears or appears out of nothing and has Brigham Young's fingerprints all over it. And that is Section 132, as he kicked out the monogamy chapter. It's about polygamy and says very specifically it is the law of God concerning marriage. And so Oaks knows exactly what he's talking about because he is the architect of the change. He gave the talk in October 2019, after the change had been made, to use the trigger code word, trust in the Lord, to refer to polygamy. The church then used that code trigger in 2022 for the children. That was the theme the whole year. It was sexual predator grooming for the church, preparing down to 11-year-olds that Nelson has made it to prepare for polygamy. And girls, not the boys, if you're unfamiliar with the FLDS church and that scandal. He only went down to 14-year-old girls like Willard Richards did, who accused Joseph Smith of being in relationships and marriages to 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, because Willard Richards was the one who forged all the sealing documents, so that he then could justify marrying the sisters who were 14 and 16 years old. You have to do your research, ex-Mormons. Just because somebody wrote it in a journal is not accurate as a witness. So this is the higher law that they keep talking about. This is according to his law. This is what they're planning for the millennium next year, as we are about to have a government collapse. And then next year, they're planning on being able to come back having owned the land. That's why they're building so many temples, is to own the land around the world, and especially in Utah, so that they then can say, this is our land, we are the theocratic government. If you don't like it, you're a dead man. It won't be, get out. If you don't like it, leave. No, if you don't like it, you'll be imprisoned and enslaved and tortured to death. This is the higher law. This is what's coming. And all of you should fear and tremble, because he just told you that's what he's doing. I see on my notes that I should have added a couple more points. One is that because it talks about polygamy, Nelson is giving the order to Mormons to practice polygamy. How do you practice polygamy? The United States doesn't allow it still. There's a loophole in the system. And my second X is my example for you, because I know there are many of you who are in that same situation. When you marry in the temple, you are sealed. The church accepts the marriage. They have respect for that marriage. So does the United States, because they recognize the church as a religion. And so all you have to do is take that marriage certificate to the courthouse, and you pay the fine for getting married. And the government approves it. And now you can pay taxes. So stupid. But it doesn't work in reverse. If you go to the government or even another religion, you are married, the church has no respect for that marriage. So yeah, obviously not LGBTQ. You have to be sealed in the temple. And so if you're a convert to the church and you're married to your spouse, you have to be remarried to them. And despite Nelson saying that a couple in the church who's not already married can now have fornication and still go through with the sealing, not have to wait a year and get civilly married, I think convert couples still have to wait a year because they just got brought into the church. And so they need a year to train as Mormons to show you can faithfully pay a full tithe before you can get sealed in the temple. And that is the church's position on that. But divorces have to be done through the government to be accepted by the government. You can't go to the church still civilly approved in marriage and say, I want a sealing cancellation, the church will require a civil divorce first. And then here in Utah, you have to go through at least a year, I think. My first ex, knowing this, abandoned the marriage and fled the country to Canada to avoid that. And then went to the courts in Canada a year later and said, oh, we're separated for a year. It's as if we're not married. Approved. And then I find out the beginning of the year from Office of Recovery Services that I'm divorced. And that I now owe back child support for the children that I'm not raising anymore, as I was a victim of abandonment and theft of the kids, which apparently is fully legalized in the federal courts. So lame. But nonetheless, she had to get a sealing cancellation. And because it wasn't for marrying another guy, which she did a year or two after that, it was because she hated me so much. She didn't want her kids learning Hebrew. She's 4 and he's 2, and you know they adore you. I heard her say when she left me. Mixing my song lyrics for you. One's from Chicago. The other is from the Dixie Chicks, no longer called Dixie Chicks because Dixie references the Confederates of the South. Which went through an anti-protest or a protest phase and caused the Dixie College to change their name too. I don't remember what they changed it to though. Oh, I think it's still called Dixie, the city. Don't think they changed that name. But and so, yeah, the church doesn't accept civil divorces. You have to have your sealing canceled. And so the loophole in the system for this change in the law of chastity is for Mormons to be obedient to the law and not violate the law of the land. But only the faithful who are in tune with the Spirit will catch on to this and be obedient to it, which requires that you divorce your spouse. Not get sealing canceled, just civilly divorced. And then the man is to marry another woman, just like Oaks, just like Nelson, and probably some others if I were to actually check, but not going to. And in so doing, you will prove your worthiness to the prophets when they get their kingdom back next year. And so, yeah, this is the loophole that they're hoping for some of you to be obedient to, because they want you as women to breed. And so they'll come out and publicly say, oh no, you can't have sex with the woman you're divorced with, even though you're still sealed to her. But she'll be brought back into the marriage next year when they get their kingdom back, because the laws of the land will be destroyed and the church will reign supreme. And so all your sealed wives will then be united with you again next year. Isn't that exciting? Huh? Yeah, my second ex is in for a big shock. Except for the fact that the church has been trying and failing to murder me. So I'm not going to be allowed back in the kingdom. But if I were, that would be the case. Is that even though we're civilly annulled, not divorced, it's as if it never happened. It's a Catholic thing. Nope, you were never married, so you never had sex, you never had kids, it never existed, and so you can't be punished by God for being separated from each other. But we're still sealed, and so next year, because we're still sealed, she would be joined back with me again. And we haven't had that talk yet. She's still struggling with many of the basic concepts of the doctrine. But, yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to point out has to do with Sister Oaks. She waited until she was 53, until Oaks came along and asked her to marry her as a second wife. And she says that she was waiting for the right guy. And so she's kind of being a little judgmental, as many of Mormon women are, by being weaponized in the church. This has to do with his discussion on love. When you get taught incorrectly about who deity is, you then emulate and implement that false precepts in your life. So if you assume that, well, I'll get to it with love. Sister Oaks is guilty of this. She has believed President Benson when he came out and said, no worthy woman will be denied the blessings of the celestial kingdom. If a man does not choose you in this lifetime and you remain faithful, you will be given the perfect man for the millennium or the afterlife. And there are so many Mormon women who are unmarried who keep repeating that over and over again to make sure that that belief becomes fact. And they use that as an excuse not to marry perfectly good men in the church, even though they too are brainwashed. But and this has been a major problem in the singles wards. And maybe I should do the dating next. But, because this already is kind of long, isn't it? So, yeah. Things are going to change with the kingdom. Once you're of breeding age, 11, you will be assigned to a man who's creepy and old. Just think about little teenage girls being married to a guy like me. Yeah, that's awful. But that's what the church is planning next year. Your daughters or granddaughters being assigned to creepy old men, so that we won't have these problems in the singles wards, because obviously the singles cannot exercise their agency properly, and so their agency must be taken away so that they can be obedient and qualify for the highest degree of the celestial kingdom of polygamy. Yay! The major victory for Satan.